speaking the truth in love. Paul says that this is a mark of maturity. A mark of maturity. In fact, it seems to imply in his passage that this is the mark of maturity. We know there's a lot more that a mature Christian character exhibits, but this seems to be one of those things that stands out as a fundamental precept of what it means to be mature, to grow up. And let's be honest, growing up is overrated. Right? Right? Growing older is not an option. Growing up is. Right? I've made it a practice of proving that point. I was told the other night I was being immature, and that was by my son. We were sitting in a service. It was actually the ordination service where we got to recognize Dennis and Sarah, but Dennis's retirement from vocational ministry, which is really just turning the chapter to what God is vocationally requiring of him now, which is to avoid Sarah. I'm kidding. That is not why he rides his bike. It's not it at all. But I'm not going to look over there. But we were sitting in this service, and of course, when I'm sitting in a service, my default position is to be one of those old guys in the balcony in the Muppets. Like, that's me. And so we're sitting there, and Tim was next to me, and and I'm pointing at different things, and I'm like, what do they? We do that better. Like, I'm pointing at all this stuff, and I don't even remember what I said, and I'm sure it was misheard. But Tim looked at me and he said, "Dad, that is not appropriate." That was my son telling me, and I said. He said, "You can't say that in church." And I said, "But I'd say it out of church, so why wouldn't I say it in church?" And he said, he made some comment about growing up. I was like, he wasn't wrong, right? But I'm still going to punish him. Right, growing up, growing older is not optional, but growing up is. And sometimes I think we've opted in the church for the wrong thing. I was reading this passage, studying it a lot this week, and I wrote down this line. I said, church, the gathering, should be more about we than about me. But we've not grown up enough, I fear, to make that the case. We like shopping churches. You need to find a church. None of you. I'm speaking generally. But you need to find a church where you're fed, where you can be plugged in, where the ministerial needs of your family are met. You need to find a church like that. And truthfully, if this is not your church, I'll help you find one. Right? But moving churches just because you didn't like it or you got offended, or there's a time to leave a church. There is a time, right? The first one being is if it's on fire, right? Good time to leave. But we've become so very fickle in our church movements, and it's become so consumeristic. Church should be about we more than me. It really should. Think of what we could have avoided if we understood this. Think of the worship wars of the 90s that sometimes, honestly, we regurgitate like a cow coughing up its cud to chew again, right? And sometimes we do that again. I've often thought that maybe the worship wars done in church should have been the old folks saying, we need music that's going to reach the young folks, and the young folks saying, we need to preserve the legacy of our old folks. That's how we should have warred in worship in the church. That would have been an appropriate worship war. Instead, we've drawn lines over what we like and what we don't like, and we couch it all behind a word, truth. Isn't it amazing what we call truth? I was watching a movie this week. It's a great movie. Like, I wanted to show this movie for a sermon. I wouldn't get away with it, copyright issues, and some of you would leave. It's a cartoon. It's Disney's Inside Out. Have you seen it? Yes. It is amazing. This movie is amazing. It's psychological, it's sociological, it's philosophical, and you're like, why can't you just watch a movie and enjoy it? I can't. I have to tear it apart. And this little girl's going through this transition in her life, and each of the emotions in her head takes on a personality. So there's joy, and there's anger, and there's disgust, and there's fear, and there's this control panel in her brain right behind her eyes, and each one of these emotions is vying for position. Who's going to be in control? And so something happens, and fear is like, oh, I need to take over. Right? And he's in there, and all of these things have good things. Sometimes sadness tries to touch things, and it taints. It seems it taints everything, and sometimes anger. Oh, anger! When anger gets the controls, right? Bad things happen, and it was amazing. Well, something dramatic happened in this little girl's life, and joy and sadness got lost inside her brain somewhere. And of course, this is the journey in the movie, is them trying to find their way back. It's a brilliant movie, but they're exploring our own emotions and how we navigate that. And along the way back, joy and sadness get on this train that's navigating the ins and outs of this little girl's memories. And on there are these crates stacked that say fact. And there's all these crates, and opinions, and there's all these crates. And there's jostling, and the train moves, and somebody bumps into them. They spill over, and all of these, the contents of these crates spills out on this train car, and they're trying to put it back together, but they look the same, and someone says, I don't know which goes where. Which are facts and which are opinions? Which go in which crates? And one of the characters makes this comment, they all look the same. It doesn't matter. They were putting opinions in fact crates and facts in opinion crates, right? It all gets mixed up. And when we talk about truth, I think sometimes we have a hard time understanding what truth is because we have a hard time differentiating between fact and opinion. How many times this last year have you heard someone quote facts? These last 2 years. Here's the statistics. These are the facts. Turn the channel. You're going to get, here's the statistics. These are the facts. And they're opposite of each other. They're exactly opposite of each other, but they're all facts. Right? We have a problem with this, speaking the truth. But here's what we've done in the church sometimes, is when our boxes of truth and opinion have gotten mixed up, we speak our opinion as if it's truth. And we require our opinion to become truth around us. And it becomes painful. And then we say things like, well, I'm just telling you the truth. You heard that? So here's how this works. Right now, I've discovered something. I got this pretty new car. It's used. But it's new and it's pretty and it excites me and it makes me look cool. I'm not cool. I wear my sunglasses after sunset because this car requires it. I play my music too loud with the windows down because this car requires these things from me. And it has leather seats in it. I've never had leather seats before. It's kind of fun. And it's a black car. And here's what I discovered this week with black cars and leather seats and hot sanctuaries. I learned an important lesson. Okay, so coming back and forth between the meetings and then driving even to Iowa, we've spent a lot of time in the car. And I got out of the car once, and I came in, and I came home in between meetings. I said, I need a change of shirts because my back was soaked. I was like, it was disgusting. Well, part of it was that leather. Part of it was the driving, all of the driving we've done, a lot of sitting. And here's the thing. Through all of this, you know what has happened? I've got this huge zit right in the middle of my back. It's like a big goiter. And people are like, hey, how you doing, Pastor? I'm like, ooh, that hurts. And I can't get to it to do the things that I need to do in order to alleviate the pain. I'm not a contortionist, and it's there. And you're like, why are you telling me this? Well, it's the truth. Well, did you need to know that? No. We've got to get this. Not every truth needs told. Right? I've got more stories. Do you want more stories? Okay. See how this works? And sometimes the world, you guys, I've got to say, this is an aside. Last week when I preached, that audience, that congregation was completely unresponsive. So I appreciate the involvement so much. It may have been my jokes. They may have been mildly inappropriate. But it was my dad's church. It doesn't matter. But I appreciate that because when I ask you if you need to know more of my stories and you say no, the fact of the matter is outside these walls, sometimes we bark a lot of truth that we don't need to say everything. And we say, well, it's just the truth. It may be, but it also may not be necessary. Amen. And it may also be that we've gotten our facts and opinions messed up. Right? Let's be honest. You can get on YouTube right now and find better preachers than you've got here. You can find, well, that was nice, but it's true. Thank you, but you can find better services. You can find that we get to cherry pick. We get to cherry pick. We get the best of everything. This is what the digital age has given us. It's given us the best of everything. The problem is when we have access to everything, we sometimes get confused about everything. Right? So this is what happens. And when we talk about speaking the truth, we need to make sure we're speaking the truth in love. Yeah. Francis Chan has just speaking of better speakers, Francis Chan has just put out another book entitled Until Unity. I read that title. I was like, that's a book I need. It's right where we are, until unity. And in there, he says, and he makes a comment, and it's a comment that I've heard, but he turned it around on me in a way that I hadn't heard, and it has affected me. Here's what he says. He says, we do not sacrifice truth for the sake of love. Amen? Right? We do not sacrifice truth for the sake of love, but he says, neither do we sacrifice love for the sake of truth. And I fear we've done that in the church sometimes. Well, it's just the truth. So here's the point. We are to speak the truth in love. So here's the first thing I want you to know. Truth without love is rightness without righteousness. You can be right and be unrighteous at the same time. I planned for this. I had shared this on a Wednesday night, but getting together with my family is something I look forward to and dread all at the same time. Some of you are like that. That's why I love the family I get to choose. But I could anticipate some conversations I was going to have. I was anticipating maybe even some conversations I was going to create. You ever do this? You ever plan ahead? Right? I even do this with board meetings. Like I will practice an entire board meeting in my head, and I'll come to board meeting and just be angry because someone has said something that made me angry, but they did it in my head and had nothing to do with the board meeting. So I've been practicing these things, and at one point I came up and I was talking to Dana, and I started rattling off these statistics. I said, "Did you know?" And I started just going off on these statistics, and she's like, "That's great. Why are you telling me this?" And I said, well, I'm anticipating that one of my siblings is going to say this. And when they say this, I'm going to say that. And I'm going to have these statistics ready for them. And she says, what are you getting ready for? And please, God, don't say it. Right? And this is sometimes we, in our rightness, we crucify righteousness. And we've got to remember that. You're like, well, give me some good tools about this. It's something I'm going to throw everyone under the bus tonight. It's something my sister-in-law says to, I think, me in particular, often, is pause before you talk. Right? It's a good strategy that I will learn someday. Right? It's these things. We can't sacrifice righteousness just because we're right. Do you hear what I'm saying on this? This is so important because we are losing the world. We are losing the world. Here's what I saw on Facebook a couple of months ago. It was a political conversation between two people. One of them who has been a part of our church, far on the right. Another who we didn't know, who is far on the left in the political spectrum. That's never a good mixture when people like that are talking without the accountability of face-to-face. It never goes well. And something was commented, and the one on the far left, who we have no idea who he was, responded. And the response of the Christian brother was, well, why don't you drive up to Wichita and we can explain this to you in person? It was a veiled threat from one of our own people. You see how this works? They may have been right in all of their facts, but their righteousness was crucified on the cross of rightness, speaking the truth in love. Here's the other thing. So the first thing is truth without love is rightness without righteousness. Love without truth is hollowed out sentiment that includes everything but means nothing. Hollowed out sentiment. There's a great image in one of the books in the Chronicles of Narnia. If you recall, there's a scene where they're two of the kids are kind of on their way into the land of Narnia. They met with Aslan first, and they got this ride, one by accident, the other on purpose, but they got this ride into Narnia on a cloud. Doesn't that sound great? I've always wanted to ride on a cloud. Like, it looks great. It looks like it would be comfortable. It looks like it's warm and inviting, and I've flown through a couple of clouds, and I recognize it's just dust particles with an accretion of water around it, held together by electromagnetic force and maybe some water tension, but it's loosely bound together, right? I've flown through them. There's not much to it, but from a distance, it looks good, it looks inviting, it looks comfortable, but if you try to stand on one, it's not going to work very, very well. And sometimes love without truth is like trying to stand on a cloud. It's very nebulous. It involves everything, but it means nothing. And we can fall into that error of love without any conviction, love without any action, love without anything of substance. Marriages more and more seem to be built on that kind of love. It's devastating us. It's devastating the church. It's devastating the world. And when the veil is lifted, when the storms roll in, when the pressure hits, it all dissolves. The Jews used to say, or maybe still do, that the same sun that hardens the clay melts the ice. And sometimes when that sun comes out and we find ourselves enveloped in this nebulous kind of living of everything's just like a cloud in the sky, that sun comes out and it dissolves. And we're left with nothing but stark reality, and we're plummeting to the ground in a free fall. Love without truth. Paul and Christ bind these things together. Love and truth. Truth and love. If it's just the truth without love, it's probably less than what Christ intended. And if it's just love without truth, it's probably destruction for the person that you love. You see, these things go together, love and truth. And this is what Christian maturity looks like. It means we're able to understand how to speak the truth in love. And let's be honest, it doesn't happen in a minute. It doesn't happen in a second. This is what growth means. This is what maturity means, that we are growing up into the person of Christ. A baby, when they're learning to talk, just makes sounds. You don't know what they're saying, but then they learn to speak more, and they begin to make sentences, and finally they're able to express themselves, but the way they express themselves is without a filter often. Right? And part of our training is to teach that appropriateness. But it seems so often that we have stymied our own development in this, in that we have regressed at times into speaking all things without the axiom of truth in love. And this is a call. This is not a difficult message. This is a call to remind ourselves what truth in love looks like, what Christian maturity looks like. It's this idea that truth reveals and love transforms. This is what the purpose of truth is. It's to shine the light. It's to reveal what's been hidden. It's to bring light to the darkness. But truth by itself does not transform anybody. I love Christian apologetics. I do not think Christian apologetics is a good way to get saved. I don't need to be convinced of God. I need to experience God. And there is a place for Christian apologetics. But I think sometimes we've focused so much on the rational that we've forgotten what it looks like to love someone. Love is the language of transformation. Truth reveals where we are, and we need to hear this. We need someone who is able to say to us, here's what I'm seeing, but it's got to be someone that is trusted. It's got to be someone that is close to us. It's got to be someone that loves us. And remember, love is not what you say. Love is what you do. Don't come to me and say, well, I've got a truth for you, and I love you, Pastor, but you're an idiot. Right? Well, you can come and say that, but if you say, I love you, but, all I'm going to hear is everything after the but. It should be something like, I love you, and here's what I'm seeing. And I love you is not just what you say. I love you is all of the work of being involved in a relationship with you prior to that point. If I meet you for the first time today, and I say, man, I love you, and I've got something to say to you. Today would be the wrong day, right? So, I love you maybe should go first because it says, I've been with you all this time. This is where speaking the truth in love begins. It begins with, I've been with you for this journey. And then even if it's a hard truth, even if it's an easy truth, to speak it in a way that is transformative, to experience it. The best illustration I could think of in my life is so personal. And I've prayed all morning about whether or not I should share this story. But Wednesday I was listening to the praise team practice. And they're getting ready for a song, Great is Thy Faithfulness, you know it. And that song for me is so much baggage, so much baggage. See, here's what had happened. 19 years ago in September, this coming September, we had a baby that had come home with us, Cody. I don't often speak about Cody. We were going to adopt him. We sat with him in the NICU for weeks. We brought him home. He stayed in our home for months. And Mom was out of the picture, but Dad showed up. And we're thankful that Dad showed up, but it was such devastation in our life. Such devastation. It was a funeral without a tombstone. And we dropped that baby off that day, and we turned our backs and we walked away forever. Cody is now almost 20 years old. I don't know where he is. We walked away forever. And that was on a Thursday in September. I was supposed to be singing the special on Sunday morning at our church at Eastboro. And the pastor had asked if I would sing, "Great is thy faithfulness." I didn't feel like God was very faithful. And between Thursday and Sunday morning, the way I handled my grief was to get drunk. And I went to church that Sunday morning, still feeling the effects of that bender. And I stood up on the platform and I sang that song. And as soon as the song ended, I set down the mic and I walked out. I walked straight out the sanctuary. Walked out the door. Not only did it not feel like God's faithfulness was not there, it didn't feel like mine was there. And as I was going down the stairs, I was leaving. I was done. A friend of mine met me. He's a big guy, and he knows I'm not one for hugging. He knows that. But he didn't give me an option. And we stood there in the stairwell at Eastboro Church of the Nazarene, and I wept in his arms. I was broken. I was guilty of sin. I was devastated, and I blamed God. And then I had to sing those words, "Great is thy faithfulness." And I wasn't even sure I believed it. And all of this world crashed in around me. And he didn't tell me what an idiot I was to go out on that bender. He didn't tell me I needed to just have faith and to believe that God was going to provide too many children in my life. He didn't say any of those things. Those things were the truth. What he did was, with all of those things, he wrapped me in his arms. And he held me. I've never quite recovered from that. The grace of that moment, I've never quite recovered from. And for me, when speaking the truth in love, when I think of that moment. And for me, it looks like this meal. You see, this meal is the acknowledgement. It's the truth that my brokenness demands a sacrifice. My sin demands something. It demands death. It demands that something be put in the grave. And this is what Jesus gave his disciples on that night. He said, "This is my body broken for you." But notice, love says, "But I'm going to do this for you." This is what love says. Truth demands that this be done, but love says, "Let me do it for you." Truth demands I go to hell. Jesus says, "Let me do it for you." Truth demands that my sins carry me to the grave. Jesus says, "Let me go to the grave for you." You see, the truth in love looks like Jesus. That's what it looks like. And you're like, "Well, I need something practical. How do I deal with this going on in my life and that going on in my family and this going on at work?" And can I just challenge you to say, ask yourself, okay, if Jesus is in this moment, how would he respond in this moment? It's more than just a what would Jesus do. It's what Philippians 2 says, "Have the very mind of Christ in you, which is also in him, who did not consider equality with God a thing to be grasped, but he emptied himself. And he made himself a bondservant, a servant, and he submitted to death, even death on a cross. But now, therefore, God has highly exalted him and has given him a name that is above every name, that at the name of Jesus Christ, every knee in heaven and on earth will bow and every tongue confess that Jesus is Christ to the glory of God the Father. You see, this is what truth and love looks like.